For 27 years, 11 months, and 15 days, nurses turned Martha Sonny von Bülow in a New York sick room while the world argued over how she had come to be there. She had been found unconscious at Clarendon Court, the Newport mansion, where she had spent Christmas with her family in December 1980. She had been 48 years old, the only child of a utilities fortune often placed between $75 and $100 million. Her husband, Claus von Bülow, was convicted in 1982 of trying to murder her with insulin, then saw that conviction reversed, and in 1985 walked out of a second courtroom acquitted. There was a black bag, there was a needle, there were children divided against one another, and a woman at the center of it all who could not open her eyes to say what had happened. She had been born aboard her father's railcar in Virginia, carried into life by motion and money. She would die in Manhattan in 2008, after nearly 3 decades without speech, without judgment, without return. Fellow travelers, this is the story of a woman who inherited a crown no child could understand, and then lost even the power to tell her own name. The world remembers the scandal. Newport, insulin, 2 trials, a film called Reversal of Fortune. The quieter thing is worse. A woman who had houses, titles, children, servants, doctors, and every purchased protection vanished from her own life while everyone else kept speaking. How had a protected daughter, born into motion and guarded by money, become the silent center of a trial no fortune could control? On September 1, 1932, in Manassas, Virginia, Annie Laurie Womack Crawford gave birth to her only child aboard her husband's private railcar. The child was named Martha Sharp Crawford. The oddity of that birth gave her an early nickname, Choo Choo, before another name, Sonny, settled over her. Her father, George Washington Crawford, had made his fortune from the fuel under American ground, natural gas and oil beneath his family's western Pennsylvania land. From the Emlenton Gas Company he co-founded in 1893, he built and merged pipelines until, by 1931, he sat as chairman of Columbia Gas and Electric, an old man with an industrial empire and, almost impossibly late in life, a small daughter. He had married Annie Laurie Womack in 1927. She was much younger than he was, from a St. Louis family connected to the International Shoe Company. When George died at his Pittsburgh home on April 6, 1935, Sonny was not yet 3. She inherited the weight of his money before she could properly understand the shape of his face. The arithmetic of her inheritance was spoken in adult language: trusts, securities, property, and protection. Sonny's earliest years were therefore shaped by people paid to manage what she would one day own. Even affection had to pass through arrangements, and arrangements were the native tongue of very rich families in 1930s America. The death left Annie Laurie rich, young, and afraid. The Lindbergh kidnapping had terrified wealthy American families in the early 1930s, and a child like Sonny seemed to carry a ransom note in her very existence. Her childhood moved between Pittsburgh, New York, Greenwich, and Newport, but movement did not mean freedom. She had governesses, servants, guarded cars, private trains, and all the arrangements made by adults who believed that safety could be purchased by keeping life at a distance. At Greenwich, Annie Laurie and Sonny lived for a time around an estate called Tamerlane, a name grand enough for conquest and strange enough for a fatherless child. In New York, Sonny belonged to the world of apartments, drivers, dress fittings, and schools where girls learned manners as carefully as mathematics. The servants knew she was an heiress before she knew what that word could take from her. Sonny's mother later became Annie Laurie Aitken, and the remarried household gave the child another adult structure without replacing George Crawford. The fortune still carried his name. In Pittsburgh and New York, businessmen knew Columbia Gas and Electric. In Sonny's nursery, that knowledge became trust officers, guardians, and grown men discussing property beyond a child's reach. She was educated at the Chapin School in Manhattan and at St. Timothy's in Maryland. She came out into society as a debutante in the post-war years, a young woman with a famous fortune and the kind of beauty that made her useful to gossip columns. Yet the girl beneath the name was shy. It was said that she made staff feel at ease more naturally than she managed a ballroom. She could remember birthdays and write notes of thanks, but the rituals of society often seemed to cost her more than they gave. Rather than go to college, Sunny travelled in Europe with her mother. Hotels, resorts, and drawing rooms became her finishing school. By her early 20s, she had learned the geography of privilege: Manhattan apartments, Swiss resorts, European names, and the soft forms of power that old families understood without needing to explain. Money had given her servants, schools, trains, and gates. It had not given her the one thing her father's death had taken: a reliable protector. So when a titled young man appeared in Europe, handsome and certain, Sunny saw not merely a husband, but a shelter. And in 1957, she stepped toward him. Prince Alfred von Auersperg was young, Austrian, athletic, and poor in the way old European families could be poor while still possessing names that opened doors. His lineage reached back into a vanished aristocratic world. His practical work at a Swiss resort was tennis, but his real currency was style, confidence, and bloodline. Sunny was 24 when she married him in 1957. He was younger than she was, striking to look at, and at home in the open air of skiing, sport, parties, and European ease. She brought inherited American millions. He brought the title of prince. The match joined two old hungers: his need for money and her need for protection. Two children came quickly. Their daughter Ayla was born in 1958. Their son Alexander was born in 1959. Sunny became Princess von Auersperg, a mother with a European name, houses, children, and enough money to make life appear effortless. For a time, the bargain looked splendid from a distance. The distance mattered. In Europe, Sunny was not always the woman guests imagined. Alfred enjoyed skiing, hunting, drinking, and the social life that came easily to him. Sunny disliked much of that world. She was more private, more anxious, more eager for domestic quiet. Servants and languages surrounded her, but they did not necessarily make her less alone. During the Auersperg years, Sunny hired Maria Schrollhammer, a German maid whose loyalty would outlast the marriage itself. Maria entered the household as staff, but she would become one of the people who knew Sunny's daily habits, her rooms, her silences, and later the details other people missed. In a great life, servants are often made invisible. In Sunny's life, one servant would one day be heard by a jury. The marriage ended in 1965. There were whispers of Alfred's infidelity, including a connection to the Italian film star Gina Lollobrigida. Whatever the precise cause, Sunny emerged at 33 with her fortune, her two children, and the old lesson made harsher: a title did not guarantee tenderness. She returned to America and lived in New York with Ala and Alexander. Divorce did not strip her of rank in the eyes of society. If anything, it sharpened the curiosity around her. She was beautiful, wounded, wealthy beyond ordinary imagining, and still young enough to begin again. At a dinner party in London, she met Claus von Bülow. He had been born Claus Borberg in Copenhagen in 1926, the son of playwright Sven Borberg and Jonna von Bulow. After his parents' divorce, after the war, and after the scandal attached to his father's wartime reputation, Claus built a new life in England. He studied law at Trinity College, Cambridge, practiced as a barrister, and moved through British and European circles with a polished fluency that made his poverty less visible. In 1959, Claus became an assistant to J. Paul Getty, the American oil billionaire then counted among the richest men in the world. The job gave Claus proximity to extreme wealth, if not ownership of it. He learned its moods, the staff, the apartments, the suspicion, the choreography of people who had so much money that ordinary embarrassment no longer applied. Sunny saw a man who understood the world that had always frightened her. Claus was elegant where Alfred had been athletic, witty where Alfred had been physical, watchful where Alfred had been restless. He courted with care. He could discuss opera, history, art, and money. He seemed to offer not escape from society, but mastery of it. On June 6, 1966, Sunny married Claus von Bülow at Brick Presbyterian Church in New York. In 1967, their daughter Cosima was born. The household now held 3 children, Ayla, Alexander, and Cosima. The von Bülows divided their lives between Manhattan and Newport, between a grand Fifth Avenue apartment overlooking Central Park and the older ceremonies of seaside society. In 1970, they bought Clarendon Court in Newport, Rhode Island. The house had 20 rooms and 7 acres facing the Atlantic. Built in 1904 from old Georgian plans, it had already passed through Newport history and Hollywood glamour, its gates appearing in the 1956 film High Society with Grace Kelly, Bing Crosby, and Frank Sinatra. Sunny filled it with children, guests, dogs, music, and the order of a woman who wanted the house to obey her sense of peace. For a brief season, she held the scepter she had been reaching for since childhood. Mother, hostess, princess by a former marriage, wife of a sophisticated European, mistress of Clarendon Court. She was rich. She was admired. She was not safe. By the late 1970s, the von Bülow marriage had hardened into a performance. Claus no longer worked for Getty. His life was supported by Sunny's money, and Sunny, for all her passivity, still controlled the fortune. He could preside at dinner, choose wine, charm guests, and turn a phrase until a room leaned toward him. The money beneath his chair remained hers. Clarendon Court became a stage for 2 temperaments moving in opposite directions. Sunny wanted quiet evenings, reassurance, her children, her bedroom, and the small domestic habits that made a large house bearable. Claus wanted conversation, opera, restaurants, travel, and the sharp air of intelligent company. He mocked her withdrawal. She felt his distance. Her medicines, her anxieties, and her private sadness became part of the household weather. The contrast became daily. At one end of the marriage were servants, redecorating, television, needlepoint, doctors, and Sunny's desire to have Claus nearby. At the other were restaurant tables, opera evenings, and the quick intelligence of people Claus preferred to entertain. He had once served Getty, a man with money enough to bend households around himself. In Sunny's house, Claus lived with the discomfort of not owning the power he performed. We have all known someone who smiles through what is breaking them. Sunny had learned in childhood and in marriage that dignity often meant endurance. In rooms where servants heard more than guests, she endured too much. There was also Alexandra Isles. She had been an actress, known for dark shadows, and she moved in the kind of New York circles where secrets rarely stayed secret for long. Claus's affair with her lasted into the period when his marriage was already in trouble. It was said that Alexandra wanted him to leave Sunny and marry her. By 1979, the pressure around him had sharpened. Divorce would have cost Claus the world he had borrowed through Sunny. Under the arrangements around her estate, her death could bring him money, property, and continued standing. A separation could leave him with far less. The difference between those 2 futures would become one of the darkest features of the case. By 1979, talk of divorce had entered the marriage. Friends noticed the tension. Servants noticed the distance. Sonny's older children, Alla and Alexander, were no longer children in the nursery. They were old enough to see the coldness in the house and to distrust the man who occupied their mother's life. Cosima, born in 1967, was still a girl and stood closer to her father. In late December 1979, the first collapse came at Clarendon Court. Sonny became weak, confused, and unsteady during the Christmas period. The family first treated it as illness, exhaustion, or overindulgence. By the next morning, she was unresponsive. Maria Schrahlhammer, the longtime maid who had served Sonny for years, urged that medical help be called. Hours passed before the doctor was contacted. Sonny was taken to hospital and entered a coma. Then, against the fear gathering around her bed, she woke. Doctors identified severe low blood sugar, hypoglycemia, and later reconfirmed a related condition after another hospitalization in April 1980. She was warned about diet, alcohol, regular meals, and the danger of another episode. The explanation was medical, but the atmosphere around the family had changed. The timing was cruel. A woman warned to manage hypoglycemia now lived in a house where everyone could explain away danger as another episode. If Sonny slurred her words, if she slept too long, if she seemed confused, the previous diagnosis offered a ready answer. It gave comfort, and comfort can be a dangerous thing. Maria had seen things that troubled her. In Klaus's possessions, she found a black bag with medications. At another point, insulin appeared among the strange items, though no one in the household was known to need it for diabetes. She told Alexander. He had no answer. The bag went back into the world of closets, servants, and private fear. Sonny recovered enough to return to her life, but the life had narrowed. Her older children distrusted Klaus. Cosima, still young, loved her father. Sonny remained between them, ill and anxious, trying to preserve the shape of a family already beginning to split. The fall did not begin with a courtroom. It began in a house where a woman had already come back once from the edge. The second Christmas was approaching. December 1980, Clarendon Court. The family gathered again in Newport, as families with old rituals often do, even when affection has gone cold. Alla and Alexander were there. Cosima was 13. Klaus was still Sonny's husband. The house held the familiar pressures of Christmas: meals, rooms prepared, old resentments folded beneath manners. Sonny was unwell and fragile, but this had become part of the family's ordinary unease. The previous year's collapse had taught them to fear her blood sugar. It had not taught them how to save her. During that final conscious stretch, Sonny seemed to falter again. Her speech weakened. Her movements lost certainty. The pattern resembled the episode of 1979, and the household moved inside that memory. She was put to bed or left to rest. People made the terrible mistake of believing that a known danger is the same as a manageable one. Then she was found unconscious in the bathroom at Clarendon Court. She was cold. She was injured. She had crossed from illness into catastrophe. Medical help came, and she was taken first to Newport Hospital, then to Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in New York, where the private rooms of Harkness Pavilion received the rich in ways ordinary wards did not. The diagnosis placed her in a persistent vegetative state. The phrase was clinical, almost plain, and therefore merciless. It meant that her body could keep the routines of survival while the woman known to her family remained unreachable. In Newport, the bathroom, the bedroom, and the closets did not change their shape. They changed their meaning. The Newport rooms that had once held opera, servants, dogs and children now held questions. Who had entered? Who had waited? Who had called? Who had known? Her brain had been starved of glucose too long. The damage was severe and irreversible. The woman who had been born in motion, who had crossed Europe with her mother, who had married a prince and then Claus von Bülow, would not return to speech. Her eyes might open, her body might breathe. The person within did not come back. In the first days, even the question of life support carried its own burden. A ventilator helped sustain her, and then, when it was removed, Sunny continued breathing on her own. The body persisted. The mind did not return. That distinction would turn the rest of her life into an argument between medicine, law, and grief. Those early hospital days also complicated suspicion. Claus opposed ending life support, a fact that later sat uneasily beside the prosecution's theory. To those who suspected him, keeping Sunny alive could avoid an autopsy and keep uncertainty intact. To those who defended him, it showed that the story against him was too simple. Sunny lay beyond both interpretations. And that was the moment the Scepter slipped. Not in a divorce court, not in a society column. On a bathroom floor in Newport, while a family still had no single answer for what had happened. Ala and Alexander believed their mother had been attacked. They remembered the first coma, the delay, the black bag, the medications, the insulin, the affair, the money. They did not wait for gossip to become evidence. They hired Richard Q, a former New York district attorney, to investigate the matter privately. The choice said something about their world. Even catastrophe first moved through private channels. The police were not the first instrument. A trusted legal investigator was. Wealth did not prevent disaster, but it did shape the path by which disaster entered public view. Koo and his team examined the household details that had once been protected by wealth: staff testimony, medical records, the black bag, the needle, the timing of calls, the marriage, and the mistress. What had looked like family misery began to take the shape of a criminal accusation. On July 6, 1981, a Newport County grand jury indicted Claus von Bülow on 2 counts connected to alleged attempts to murder Sunny, one for the 1979 coma and one for the 1980 collapse. The private disaster of Clarendon Court became public property. Sunny could not testify. She could not accuse. She could not forgive. She could not correct a lie or confirm a truth. Every person in the case would speak around her, and the courtrooms were waiting. The first trial began in Newport in 1982. The story that had moved through servants' corridors, hospital rooms, and family suspicion entered a courthouse where wealth could not keep the doors closed. The case carried everything the public could seize upon: an heiress, a European husband, a mistress, insulin, Christmas, a mansion, and a woman suspended between life and death. The proceedings turned Newport society inside out. The courthouse became the place where private rooms were described for strangers, where family habits were translated into motive, and where medical readings became instruments of accusation. The transcripts ran into thousands of pages. What had once been whispered over dinner became testimony. Television and newspapers made Sunny's private collapse into national theatre. Newport had been famous for Vanderbilts, summer cottages, and carefully arranged visiting lists. Now it was famous for testimony about blood sugar, syringes, and a marriage whose most intimate failures had become exhibits. The prosecution described Claus as a man trapped by money. If Sunny divorced him, he would lose access to much of the life he had been living. If she died while they were still married, he could benefit. Alexandra Isles gave the state a motive beyond money, a future Claus might have wanted, one that required Sunny to be gone, or at least removed from the marriage. Maria Schrahlhammer became one of the central witnesses. She had worked for Sonny for many years. She knew the closets, the rooms, the rhythms of the family, and the difference between ordinary private misery and something that felt dangerous. Her testimony about the black bag and the delays in seeking help gave the prosecution its human center. The needle, tested for insulin, gave it its object. Claus did not testify. He sat in the courtroom with the composure that had always been part of his force. In March 1982, the jury found him guilty on both counts. On May 7, 1982, he was sentenced to prison terms totaling 30 years, though he remained free on bond during appeal. For Alla and Alexander, the verdict seemed to answer the question that Sonny could not. Their stepfather had been judged guilty. Their mother, though unreachable, had at least been heard through evidence, servants, doctors, and children. And yet the law had not finished with Claus von Bülow. He hired Alan Dershowitz, the Harvard law professor, who treated the conviction not as the end of a moral story, but as a legal structure to be dismantled. The appeal challenged the handling of evidence, the private investigation, and material that had not been properly shared with the defense. In April and May of 1984, Rhode Island Supreme Court reversed the convictions and ordered a new trial. The second trial began in 1985 in Providence. This time, the defense shifted attention towards Sonny's own health and habits. Alcohol, prescription drugs, aspirin, depression, metabolic disorder, and the uncertainties of hypoglycemia all became part of the argument. The defense did not need to prove a different story with certainty. It needed only to make the state's story less certain. That change was brutal. Sonny, who could not speak, had her private life dissected in public. The woman in the hospital bed became, in legal argument, a possible author of her own catastrophe. Her children heard their mother's weaknesses turned into strategy. Claus's silence remained intact. On June 10, 1985, the second jury acquitted him. Legally, Claus von Bülow left the courthouse a free man. No one was convicted of causing Sonny's final coma. The verdict did not heal the family. It divided it more permanently. Alla and Alexander remained convinced of Claus's guilt. Cosima stood by her father. That loyalty cost her dearly inside the family. Sonny's mother, Annie Laurie Aitken, excluded Cosima from her estate. And when Annie Laurie died in 1984, Cosima was not allowed to attend the funeral. Money, which had shaped Sonny's life from infancy, now arranged the punishment of her daughter. In July 1985, Alla and Alexander filed a civil suit against Claus, seeking damages on Sonny's behalf. The battle continued until Christmas Eve 1987, when a settlement was reached. Claus agreed to divorce Sonny to give up claims to her fortune and to leave the United States for London. He also agreed not to profit publicly from the case. In return, Cosima was restored to a share of her grandmother's estate. The family that had once gathered at Clarendon Court was now 3 camps, each carrying a different version of loyalty. Ayla and Alexander turned grief into public work. They founded what became the National Center for Victims of Crime, and Sonny's name was also attached to work in coma and brain trauma research. Cosima kept faith with her father. Claus lived in London under the long residue of suspicion. The hollow crown of the case passed into culture in 1986, when Alan Dershowitz published Reversal of Fortune, and again in 1990, when the film adaptation appeared with Glenn Close as Sonny and Jeremy Irons as Claus. Irons won the Academy Award for Best Actor. The world watched a polished version of a wound that Sonny herself could neither approve nor resist. By then, she had already been absent for a decade. and there were still many years of silence to come. Sonny's final years were not measured by parties, marriages, journeys, or decisions. They were measured by care. For years, she lay at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in New York, first in Harkness Pavilion and later in another private setting, guarded and tended. Nurses turned her body, watched her skin, brushed her hair, changed the details of a day she could not enter. Her children visited. They sat beside a mother whose hand could still be held, though no answer came back through it. The cost of that care was immense. In the first year alone, it was placed at hundreds of thousands of dollars. By the early 1990s, private room charges had risen to figures that would have ruined ordinary families. Sonny's fortune, born from gas fields and pipelines, now paid for the maintenance of a body that had outlived its conscious life. There was no recovery program that could restore her. There was only maintenance, turning, washing, feeding, watching, preventing infection, and preserving dignity after personality had vanished from view. This was not the heroic medicine of a single operation. It was the daily arithmetic of survival, repeated by nurses and paid for by trustees. Clarendon Court was sold in 1988. The mansion where Sonny had hosted guests, walked her Labrador retrievers, and suffered both Christmas collapses passed into another owner's hands. The Fifth Avenue life and the Newport life became memory. The woman who had once moved among 20 rooms and 7 oceanfront acres now occupied a single bed. In 1998, she was moved from hospital to a private nursing home. The world outside her room changed completely. Presidents changed. The Cold War ended. New scandals replaced the old one. The internet entered daily life. The Twin Towers fell. Barack Obama was elected president. Sonny remained fixed at the threshold she had crossed in 1980. There were birthdays in rooms where one person could not answer. The calendar kept giving them dates no illness could cancel. December 6th, September 1st, Christmas, anniversaries of verdicts, anniversaries of the morning at Clarendon Court. There were visits that required no reply, only the stubborn decency of showing up. Ala and Alexander, who had fought the legal battle, kept honoring the mother who had not been able to fight for herself. Cosima carried her own grief on the other side of the family divide. The coma did not merely silence Sonny. It forced her children to grow old around an absence. Her first husband, Prince Alfred von Auersperg, had his own strange echo of her fate. In 1983, he was badly injured in a car accident in Austria and entered an irreversible coma. He died in 1992 after 9 years. The man who had once made Sonny a princess passed through his own long unconsciousness while Sonny lay in hers. Klaus remained in London, maintaining his innocence and living among society, art, restaurants, and the lingering curiosity of people who could not look away from his name. The settlement kept him from profiting from the story. It did not free him from it. On December 6, 2008, Sonny von Bülow died at the Mary Manning Walsh Nursing Home in Manhattan. She was 76. Her death was attributed to cardiopulmonary arrest. After 27 years, 11 months, and 15 days in a persistent vegetative state, her heart and lungs finally stopped. A memorial service was held on January 14, 2009, at Brick Presbyterian Church in New York, the same church where she had married Claus in 1966. She was buried at St. Mary's Episcopal Churchyard in Portsmouth, Rhode Island, near the coast, and not far from the Newport world that had once held her name. The broken scepter was laid down quietly at last, but the question remained. Sonny von Bülow's life is often reduced to a legal puzzle: insulin or illness, husband or accident, guilt or reasonable doubt. That is the shape a courtroom gives to pain. It asks for verdicts. It asks for proof. It asks the living to arrange the silent into evidence. The case asked people to choose between two unsatisfying stories. In one, a husband used the most private access a marriage allows and turned medicine into a weapon. In the other, a sick and unhappy woman became the subject of a family's certainty and a prosecution's overreach. The law could choose only what was provable. Memory chose less neatly. And yet, Sunny was more than the unanswered question at Clarendon Court. She was the child born on a train in Manassas in 1932. She was George Crawford's daughter, Annie Laurie's only child, Ayla and Alexander's mother, Cosima's mother, a woman who married a prince in 1957 and Claus von Bülow in 1966. Before she became a symbol, she had birthdays, houses, dogs, children, fears, illnesses, and the ordinary hunger to be cherished for herself rather than guarded for her money. The terrible irony was that wealth both protected and exposed her. It wrapped her childhood in attendance, schools, and locked gates. It carried her into European titles and Newport rooms. It also drew toward her men who could live beautifully beside her without ever being free of what she possessed. The fortune that made her visible also made it harder to know who saw her clearly. That is why the story still troubles people. It has no clean shape. It does not let wealth be merely glamorous, nor poverty of spirit merely villainous. It shows a family with everything that could be named and purchased, undone by the thing no trust document could guarantee: safety inside love. No jury returned Sunny to herself. No settlement restored the family that had gathered for Christmas in 1980. No film, no book, no memorial service could make her speak. The law gave Claus von Bülow an acquittal. Public memory gave him suspicion. Sunny was given neither judgment nor answer. Her silence made every answer feel incomplete, even the legal ones. The story had a verdict, then another verdict, and still no voice from the woman whose life had been taken from ordinary time. Fellow travelers, there are lives in which the center goes quiet and everyone else spends years speaking over the silence. Sunny's was one of those lives. The argument outlived her. The money outlived her. Clarendon Court outlived her. Even the gates and rooms that had known her final mourning went on serving other households, as houses always do. After all the hearings and headlines, the simplest fact remained the hardest. A mother of 3 went into a bathroom in Newport and never returned to herself. The rest became law, art, inheritance, estrangement, and memory. Around her, people chose sides because people must do something with helplessness. They named guilt, defended innocence, signed settlements, made foundations, wrote books, made films, and kept visiting. She had entered the world in motion, carried by a railcar through Virginia. She left it after nearly 28 years in a bed in Manhattan. Between those two facts lay beauty, title, motherhood, fear, accusation, and one of the loneliest silences in American society. And in the palace of that story, the throne stood empty. If you found something of yourself in this story, even for a moment, you may find it in the next one too. Subscribe to The Fallen Scepter and stay with us. There are many more lives to remember.